Hello, friends, and welcome again. Here we are again on Monday evening. And As you can see, maybe in the background, I'm in Mumbai this week, coming to join you. I'm visiting the Ananda Ashram here and having a very lovely time. And this evening, what our topic is going to be this evening is fear of public speaking. And of course, one of the things I was choose topics that are somewhat pertinent to me. And I've been doing a lot of public speaking lately, having visited India after being away for all this COVID time. And this topic came up in a little side conversation within the last week. And I thought I'd address this because somebody was hinting at the concept. But I want to expand it a little bit and go just more than just public speaking. It's just general, talk a little bit about maybe anxiety in general, being in social situations, being around a lot of people, having to interact with people in a social way. And I'm very sympathetic to people when they express a certain hesitancy, reticence to engage in that way. I'm very sympathetic because although I have to do a lot of public speaking now because of just my duty to do that, I also have a bit of history, so I've had a chance to practice. But I look back on my own life and I can remember the times when I was beginning and some of my first forays in doing this. And I think all of us remember back when we were kids, going to school. You had to get in front of the class, you had to recite, or maybe the school play, you had to get up there and you had to do something. And it gets a little more sophisticated as you get older. And I think it's a universally, we all felt that anxiety. Oh my God, and I always admired those people. There are those people that in any time, anywhere, they can get up there and grab that microphone and sing the song, do the play, all of that. They're the life of the party types. And I was not that way, and I suspect most of us aren't that way. And there's just some hesitancy. But the problem is as we get older and we go along through life, we find that we carry that with us, you might say. Sometimes we carry it into our adult life. And if it continues, and particularly if we're in a situation where we're thrown into those situations, we find it begins to dictate us. In other words, that anxiety becomes, can be really burdensome. And I know people have told me this, you read about this, is that it just becomes so difficult for people, it can actually become incapacitating to some degree. And I look back and I'd like to share an early story from my own experience with that. And I'd like to also add that I think all of us share this to some degree, most of us, because it's said that public speaking is the most commonly held fear, having to stand up in front of that audience or present something, or you're put on the spot all of a sudden without warning. And oh my God, your mind goes completely blank. And it can be a kind of embarrassing. Well, that's what happened to me when, I had the normal jitters in school, just like everybody else, but I didn't think it was particularly out of the ordinary. It was not unusual. And then I met Swami and I ended up moving to Ananda village. And in the first, probably somewhere in the first couple of years, there was a radio station in Sacramento, sent a reporter up to Ananda village to interview people. Well, there wasn't very many people to interview at that particular day. And so I got volunteered and I said, sure, I'll do the interview. And so we went, got a special place, and it was this woman, she had her recording deck. And what they were going to do is they were going to record this interview and then play it on the radio. Fortunately, it wasn't live. It was going to be edited, you see, and they were going to ask me all these different things and put it together in the program. But I was all ready to go. And I was there sitting with her. She was there. And she says, okay, here we are, it's talking into the microphone, and 2, 3, 2, 1, play. And she pressed the button and started asking me questions. And I answered one, I kind of stumbled a little bit, and she asked me another, and I started getting tighter and tighter and tighter and tighter. And finally, I got so tight, and I froze. I mean, you know, I froze, and I just couldn't got, and it got extremely awkward for me, obviously, but it got awkward for her too, and she could see what was happening, and she basically had to stop. And I said, I'm sorry that, you know, that, and she couldn't wait, you know, we produced nothing. And I felt really embarrassed, and and it was terrible. And so, you know, it's one of those moments that you look back on. I'd sort of gotten over it by now, almost, because sometimes I look back and I go, ooh, that was bad. And I had two choices at that time, because it was, I couldn't shake it immediately. I was just mortified that I'd done so poorly. And I had two choices, really. I could go forward and avoid ever getting in a situation like that, and not, you know, not putting myself in the place to be interviewed or have public speak, or I could get better. I could practice. I could think about it. I could plan ahead for the next time. Now, I did the first one. Just after that, I just avoided any possibility, because that was so difficult for me that I was, I don't know, 23, 24 years old. That was so difficult for me that I just avoided everything that had anything to do like that. Until another 5 years went by, maybe. And I found myself, and, you know, when you start avoiding things, you start avoiding situations, and you find that it starts to actually rule your life a little bit. And so I was in that. I began to notice that. And after about 5 years, Swami Kriyananda, who at that time, in the early decade of Ananda's existence, he did most of the public programs, everything, you know, he was there. Then, of course, he couldn't be tied to that always. And so one by one, he began to bring others into a role to fill in for various functions, so that he could leave and go off and do teaching elsewhere. And of course, Nayaswami Jaya was one of the very first he brought on to do that function, that sort of function. And then he brought one or two others. And then all of a sudden, one day, I got word that Swami Ji wanted me to start doing the Sunday satsangs. That was everybody in the community came to it on Sunday, and we'd have a full house. And you know, like we do now, and it was a variation of that. And I was, as part of that, of course, I was supposed to give a discourse, you know, what is that, 20-minute discourse or so, could be longer. And oh, I was mortified. It was just like my worst nightmare come true. But there's no saying no in a situation like that. When Swamiji asks you to do something and there's an expectation, of course, I had no excuse to say no. I wasn't going to tell him, Swami, I'm scared to death. So I started doing it. And what I should have done from the very first, and not wasted all that time. I said, well, I have to do this, so I better practice, I better study. And this is what I recommend people. If you're starting and you're in that same situation where you realize it's something you have to do, it's part of your job, you want to just be accomplished at it and save yourself if you're put in a position of having to do something like that. Even a 5-minute talk is, you need to practice and prepare. And so that's what I did very much. I prepared hours and hours just to give that little talk. And so it went. In the years after that, I prepared, I said I'd do my best, and I followed Master's advice. Master said, make notes, and then maybe write them on a little card if you have to. And he said, throw the card away before you give the talk. Well, that was too much for me. I had to carry my card with me for a couple of years, but then eventually I did let the card go. But he said, he used to say, start with trying to win the audience. In other words, try to put the audience at ease. And doing that, you'll put your own self at ease. So he said, start with a joke or a story or something, spiritual story, or maybe if it's a little bit humorous story, something that everybody can relax with. And this is also a function that people, you have the ability, which I did not at that time. So you start with the song. Of course, we start with the chant. And now this, of course, puts our own selves at ease. And the point here is to set the tone of a relaxed tone, and then speak slowly. Don't go too fast. I used to notice that if I was speaking quickly, if I was going really quickly talking like this, people would know immediately that I was nervous. And so I slowed down and take a deep breath and not run out of breath. So I found myself in the very first times, I'd be speaking and not take a breath, and all of a sudden, and then of course that would tighten you up and tighten me up, and it would make the heart start beating fast. All of these normal things, which those of you have done this, I too went through all of that. But the more important point was, I had to say yes. Swami put me in a position where I had to take it on and do whatever I needed to do. And I accepted that. I didn't accept that there was going to be any alternative. So in a sense, I had to do this, and that was it. Be embarrassed or whatever. Now, Swamiji had the grace in him to be somewhat of a natural speaker. He said he had a little bit of trepidation, especially at first when he was asked to do a Kriya initiation very quickly and to get up in front of the crowd very quickly without any much warning at all. But he took to it quite well. But he made a point of saying that we want to get to the point where we can speak by inspiration, to prepare ourselves more than preparing the talk, or first prepare ourselves before preparing a talk. In other words, inwardly be inspired by what we're going to say, and try to focus on that element of being inspired, have it be meaningful to you personally, so that you have some inward attunement in knowledge of what you're saying inwardly. Even if you don't, it's a very abstruse subject, you can at least be enthusiastic about sharing what you know. Don't go beyond what you know. If you don't know something, just say, I don't know this, but this has been my perception or what I've come to understand. And keep referring it back to the teachings, referring it back to Master's teachings, what Swami said, what the books say, or to the wider tradition, you could say, of spiritual teachings. This is commonly known, as opposed to going, well, my experience says X, Y, Z, when your experience may not be broad enough. It's borders on opinion rather than truth or knowledge. And so it's good if you have an experience of that truth, but refer it back to the high teachings of which we're trying to transmit to people. And if you do this and breathe again, you take that breath and you go slow and you embrace the audience. You might say, spread your aura into the room that you're speaking to. Swamiji would say, try to reach out, project your aura out beyond the confines of the audience to the back of the room. Because one of the reasons we become very tight is, it's very obvious, we're self-conscious in a bad way. You could say we're wrapped up in our own little self, what we are, what we're looking like, what are people thinking, and we have to project that little self out to be embracive. And so very consciously try to feel that you have an aura around yourself and project it out with a feeling of harmony and joy and wanting to share, really wanting to share with other people, like you have something precious that you want to give to other people. And in this way, I find it's, in a sense, it's a little bit relaxing, but it takes practice. Now, Swami said when he first started speaking, he eventually spoke from inspiration alone, but he himself took copious notes and studied very hard. I've run across people who took Swami's advice, that's prepare yourself, don't prepare your talk. And he said, but they forgot the second part of what he said. He says, but remember, for the first 10 years or so, he always prepared his talks with notes. And then finally, he realized that was the wrong way around. And he just put the notes aside and he did it from inner inspiration. So he too started that way. And then he eventually said, you graduate and you feel comfortable, knowledgeable with your topic. Now, Swami also said something, if you're speaking about a topic like of yoga or teachings, know what you're talking about. He said he read every one of Master's books and writings and lessons. Anything he can get his hands on, he read that. He read it. He took notes and read it and studied it. Now, we're not always, I don't want to limit this to just speaking about these teachings, because sometimes we're called upon to introduce somebody at a festival or to do a little introductory talk about some topic that's just been handed to us. It's good training to practice that. Practice at any time being able to say something and just ad lib, at liberty, to just share something, a short talk. But this does take practice to be able to do that. And I found that if I'm going into a situation where it's possible I might be called upon, I still don't tend to want to volunteer always, but if I might be called upon, I tend to think of a few things. What's going on here? What might I share? What might be meaningful to people? And so all in all, what I'm saying is try to be prepared. And you'll find that if with a little bit of preparation, your self-confidence will begin to grow and you can begin to relax. Now, Swamiji said he was of the mind that he was able to rise above other people's opinions of him. Now, this is admirable. Most people can't. We're afraid or we're nervous because we want people to think well of us and we don't want to make a fool of ourselves or embarrass ourselves. But Swami really didn't. He had that self-confidence to know who he was. He wanted to do a good job. In other words, he didn't want to embarrass Master and be a bad representative. But yet he realized he had to project in the best way possible, and he had the tools to be able to do that. And he knew the teachings, and it was just a matter of refining how to present those teachings. And in his case, he would be a master of coming up with practical examples from day-to-day life. And I think this comes also, I've noticed good teachers, they draw from day-to-day life. I was driving to town and I stopped at a shop, and this happened, and it reminded, and it's somehow and by doing that, you can relate to the common realities of the audience. They say, yeah, that's happened to me too. It's not something personal only to yourself. If it doesn't relate to other people, and it's better generally not if you're to tell stories too much about yourself. If you say I was at the store, the story should be about something other than yourself, because it's okay once in a while if it's significant, but generally stories about yourself, like I started out telling about my own experience, aren't necessarily recommended because you don't quite know how they'll go over, and they don't always, and they kind of sometimes can go amiss, put it that way. And so keep these two things in mind. So what you don't want to be forced into having to learn. So why not volunteer ahead of time rather than finding yourself having to avoid? Because we can't do that, because if we don't learn our lessons in this life, we're just going to have to come back in a future life and have to learn that. Now, this sort of segues into a larger topic, which is public speaking is just only one aspect of being social, being engaged in a social situation. But what we find is all of us also find ourselves in social environments where, have you ever found yourself having to go to a social function and you don't know what to say. You don't know people there. You don't know how to strike up a conversation. You can't relax. You feel isolated. And you find yourself just, I don't want to go there because it's so awkward. And people do come up to you and you don't feel comfortable. And unfortunately, that means others don't feel comfortable. And I think some of us probably in previous lives lived as hermits in a cave, maybe, and because we're not inclined to go that way. But yet, there again, we often, our Dharma puts us in those situations. Our jobs put us in those situations. Our social relationships put us in those situations. And so, again, a few pointers when you find yourself, you're going to be in a social situation. You go into a room and you want to just go in the other room and hide, you might say, or find one friend and just stick with that friend and not mingle with anybody. But you're not maybe really fulfilling what you're supposed to be doing. So again, I think it's try to mentally feel your aura being embracive. And you could, in a kind way, these are people who you don't know yet. They're friends who you have yet to meet. I think it's a mistake to go in and think that they're going to be your adversaries or opponents. Go in with the positive assumption that these are people that want to meet you, that find you interesting and that want to share with you. And again, just try to spread your aura and become it helps you get out of your shell. And this applies to whether you're speaking to a public audience for a lecture or just in a social situation. If it's appropriate, be enthusiastic, speak enthusiastic, initiate rather than just react. So in other words, if you project a certain enthusiasm, a joyfulness, a happiness, keep a good posture, how you hold your body, and your facial gestures are welcoming, you'll find that the audience and other people will return that. Now, if you're public speaking, you want to modulate your voice and modulate your pace, and just as you would in a audience, you'd perhaps ask rhetorical questions to the audience. And when you're in a social situation, I found one of the best things to do is to break the ice. You might think ahead of time of a few things dependent maybe about what's the function and why are we all there. Think ahead of time. What might you ask somebody? How might you break the ice? What might you have in common with the people are there? And figure that probably many of the other people that are there in the same boat as you are. And again, don't avoid it. Deal with it. And one of the things I've noticed is in a social situation, you think ahead, but take the initiative and ask questions. So if you start chatting with somebody, what I like to do is I like to start asking them questions about themselves. There's, oh, where are you from? And they say something, and they say, oh, is that a nice city? I've never been there. And so yeah, and this is, if I ever go there, what do you think I ought to do if I'm going there? Something, you start asking them questions, and that breaks the ice. You get the initiative going. You start to speak. You sound like you're interesting. But really what I've found, and avoid talking about yourself unless somebody asks you something. Then of course but don't, somebody starts to talk and you immediately break in and say, well, this is what I think, this is what I do. People don't like that. What they like to be asked is something about themselves. People generally like to talk about themselves. Now, I know that sounds a little cynical, but it's true. And what our job is usually, if you want to be considered a good conversationalist, learn to listen and learn to ask good questions. And so you start thinking, what do I have in common with this person? I remember going to a lady's house, a devotee, and she had a husband who hated anything having to do with spirituality and religion. He just absolutely hated it. And he was antagonistic toward her, toward all her friends who are of that mind. And because I think he felt threatened by her spiritual inclinations, but he wanted nothing to do with it. But she was desperate. And so I was passing through town. I was in a different city visiting one of our centers, and she was a center member, a very coordinator of that center. And she says, "Oh, please, 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 Jack, would you come to dinner with her and her husband? I'd just like them to meet you, and not every one of us is a bad person and gonna, a zealot." So I said, okay. And then but I knew it was might be a little fraught. So again, I put my thinking here to work, and I looked around the room and I could tell him, and I started asking him questions, before he could start grilling me. I said, "How do you do?" Hi. And I noticed something in his room. I knew he was a sports fan. I could tell because some of the little memorabilia or things he had in the dining room there. I says, "Oh, hey, do you like that team?" And he says, "Oh yeah, I do." He says. Then I said, because I had read the newspaper on the flight, there that this team, it was a football team, they had won. I says, "Hey, did you see the game on Sunday? That last week, that was a great game, wasn't it?" And he says, "Yeah, it was. It was a really good game." And then I started asking him questions about that, and he got going on that topic. And then one topic led to another topic, and I knew enough of a little about a lot of things, and I just kept asking him questions, and he just, at the end of the thing, we were, I could say, almost friends. And but his wife was very, very appreciative because it relieved a certain tension that was going on in this family. But this is what I'm saying, it's practical. But the point here is most people like to talk about themselves, and if you show interest. Now, this is not manipulative. You might be thinking I was manipulating him, and I wasn't. I was just showing interest. I was being respectful. And that's really what it's about, respecting the other person's realities. And so if you find yourself in social situations, go in thinking ahead of time. What am I going to say? What can I do? It's a task. Don't go in as a victim. Oh, I got to go to this thing. Go in, you're part of, this is what you're doing, and then initiate. Don't isolate yourself. Keep good posture. Keep your chest up, spine straight. Take a breath and look at people and engage them. And you'll find that it's not as hard as you think. And you find that you start in little ways like this. You begin to find that if you can handle yourself in social situations, not feel yourself to be so awkward. Now, when you're a teenager or when you're early in your life, we can't help because we don't have enough experience. But really, we gain self-confidence. The reason, you could say spiritually, underneath all of this, the anxiety, social anxiety, from a spiritual perspective, is based upon being overly concerned about ourselves. It's being too self-aware. Essentially, it's an ego problem. You just inferiority, superiority conflicts, approaches, attitudes toward life. It all comes from egotism, but it can be too big of an ego, or you can diminish yourself. And it's that what we really want is we want to get to the point of self-forgetfulness. In other words, we're not thinking about ourselves. We're thinking about others, serving others. And I've come to see that most people are just like us in most things. They vary a little bit, but the same problems we have, they have. And there's a lot more that connects us than divides us. And so if we go in to situations with that, I think we're much more likely to have a successful outcome. No, so what I'd like to do, if any of you have questions and answers on this topic, write them in the chat box, and I'd like to answer any of them. Sometimes, sometimes I don't always stay for the chat and the question and answer, but today I have plenty of time, and so I'd like to open it up if you do have any questions in that regard. I don't see any coming, so I'm going to go back and
it may take a little time for people to type.
Yeah, that's right. I should have See, I made a mistake here. I should have warned you ahead of time, everybody ahead of time. But I think you might sum this up by saying, take small steps. Prepare yourself ahead of time, take small steps, and be willing to face it. Social awkwardness is just one of many fears that people have. But it's related into all of our fears. If we approach it, if we are successful for being able to face these fears and just recognize that, oh, I've got this problem. The recognition of it will, you might say, is the very first step, because then it leads you to doing something about it and developing the courage to actually take steps to face whatever your fears are. Now, people have fears of many other types, and so we could broaden this question out to approach many different types of fears, but all of them essentially take a certain amount of courage. The courage to face, the courage, whatever your fears are, the courage to grow. Remember that story from Sri Yukteswar, when his mother didn't want him to go into the closet. And so she said, oh, there's a ghost in the closet. Well, Sri Yukteswar is the mind that he ran to the closet and he said, where's the ghost? I want to see it. He wasn't afraid of it at all. He wanted to embrace it. So I'm suggesting we have that same sort of approach to our approach to, you might say, to public speaking or whatever it might be. So, I got a couple questions here. Let's see what they say. Any resources for learning voice modulation? I think the best resource is to listen to people who speak well. Now, I spent my youth and middle age and even into old age at the feet of Swami Kriyananda, who was an excellent speaker. I would say you could do two things at once. You could, or maybe more than two. You could gain inspiration by listening to his lectures, his tapes. You could gain inspiration, and you could also gain technical ability to watch how he approached it. Modulation of the voice is sometimes speaking more quickly, pausing at times, speaking in a high voice, and then using your voice to paint a picture. And when you why are some people good storytellers? Listen to a good storyteller. And that's another way. There are, you can go on the internet. I imagine you can find really good storytellers. They even have, I know, where I lived in California, they used to have festivals, storytelling festivals, where people would come together, the best storytellers, and they would tell a tale. And you would listen to that tale and it would draw you into it, and you would just be mesmerized. And this is ancient tradition in all cultures. Listen to a good storyteller. How did they speak? And they'll modulate the voice, they'll illustrate the voice with their how they speak, the tone. So they're painting a verbal picture. So do that. Now, in the midst of if you're doing public speaking, a good way to do this is to introduce a story into your talk, and then paint and practice telling that story. Or, if it's a funny story, that's even sometimes better, because then you get the joke aspect in there, which relaxes people. So practice that. But I think storytelling is a good way to learn how people use their voice in a creative way. Okay, Home Guru, how do you reattempt to enter a situation where you fail to engage effectively? Well, that's another kind of courage. The courage to just put the past aside and go back into it again, and take the embarrassment, take the awkwardness, and just to say, I want to try again. I want to do it again, and just face that. It's awkward sometimes to do that. And sometimes maybe it's more than just awkward. There's resistance even for you getting back in there and doing it. But failure is not really as big as we think it is. We have these moments in life where we just totally blow it. And we say, I never want to do that again. Well, little time passes, and why not? If it was worth doing the first time, why isn't it worth doing again or trying again? I don't know there's any magic formula, but I do think we have to be able to put the past behind us in some fashion, not carry our regrets and failures or bad experiences with us, even though I still cringe when I think of that experience. And there's half a dozen other, things I look back on with embarrassment. I think, oh, I didn't do that, did I? We laugh at it, but still, we can still relive those awkward moments. But we have to, we have to graduate, and because otherwise, if we're being held back by something, we're being prisoner of something in the past. And sometimes other people are the wardens of the prison, you might say, and other people are holding us back. They're holding something over us, you might say. And we say, I don't care. I'm going to do it again. I'm a new person. Passes. What else? That's the best I can say. So give it a try. Give it a try. How do we know if we are meant to share the teachings formally in classes or not? Well, sometimes we get asked. Somebody asks you. That's how it came about with me. I would have run away I wasn't going to volunteer, but now some people actually feel a calling to share, and they may feel a little hesitancy. Am I being an egotist for wanting to do this? No, not necessarily. If you can see that you have a talent, it's not a bad thing to share your talent. So the ability to present the teachings, I think you look for opportunities to do it appropriately in a mild way, to practice, to get into the arena. Don't jump into the big arena first thing, but there's small arenas. Taking responsibility for something. Somebody needs to do this. Somebody needs to share this in small ways, and you go in, and then other people begin to recognize that you have, oh, this person is a well-spoken person. They would be nice to be able to have them do X, Y, Z. And sometimes situations come and they say, does anybody want to volunteer to do this? And if you feel an inclination, volunteer. Does it mean you're meant to be a teacher? Not necessarily, but one thing leads to another, and you begin to see if it feels right for you. Do you enjoy it? Do other people enjoy your presentations, but for the right reasons? All of us can probably tell really good, funny jokes, but if we just tell good, funny jokes, is that really the purpose of what we're doing? No, it's not. It's sharing. In our case here, we're sharing the teachings and trying to be helpful, bring these high ideals down into the practical realm, to make Master's message better known, accessible to people. But I think mentally make yourself available. In other words, reduce the resistance. And if you're mentally available, I think people will pick up that you're willing. You have a willing attitude, a willing attitude to share. And if people know and that goes beyond teaching. If you're willing, that should express itself. I'm willing to set up the chairs. I'm willing to hand out the flyers. I'm willing to stay after and speak with people. If you're willing in all these other ways, sooner or later, somebody's going to say, hey, we need somebody to teach the class. Teach the class, would you? And I'm willing to do that too. What you don't want to do is says, I don't set up chairs. I don't set up the room. I don't sweep the carpet. I don't do anything. I just want to teach. That's my dharma. I would never pick a person like that to be a presenter, because they've got the wrong attitude. They're willing to do whatever is needed. That's it. And if teaching is needed, it's not better, it's not worse, it's not higher, it's not lower. It's just one more thing that needs to be done. So if you have an approach to it that somehow you think teaching is more worthy than other things, be careful. That develops spiritual pride. And I'm not saying that you're asking out of that. I don't want to imply anything because I don't know who's asking the question on that one. But we need to be willing to serve in whatever way we can. If we have some inclination that this might be fun or it might be enjoyable to do. And I know many people say that is, and I've actually had fun and enjoyed it too at times. But I think there are those of us who tend to like to just be quiet, and those of us who are more socially engaging. But I don't think one is better than the other. It's just different personalities, and all of us can share something. And if you're just willing to share, willing to do whatever's needed, your willingness to share the teachings will also be recognized, and then you get to jump in there when the chance is there and give it a try. How can we share our own experience asked by audience? Oh, certainly. If somebody asks you, and no, I'm saying that if asked by audience and how to deal with such questions, if somebody asks you specifically, what was your experience? Well, then it's fair. They want to know you. What I'm saying, don't share your experience too much, is because it becomes too personalized. You have to maintain, and it tends to narrow the focus of your discourse to, it's too narrow. And you want to keep it a little bit broad. Now, making it broad is the point. And sometimes sharing your experience as an example of a certain wavelength in that broad spectrum, it's okay. And I don't mean not to do that at all, but don't let that be one story after another. And then you get people say, oh, I had this dream last night and I want to share my dream with you. I just go, oh, because it's generally not a good idea. Now, sometimes it can be, it can be if it's short and it's illustrating a bigger point, and so, or, people will tell you things that are maybe not all that appropriate, I'm saying you can go wrong more ways than you can go right. And so be careful. That's all I'm saying. But if you're asked, that's a different thing. Because then, to say, no, I'm not going to tell you anything about myself, that would be impolite. And so I think I hope you see what I'm trying to say. Do you have any practical tips to forget about yourself, your ego self? Well, there was, Swami used to say there was two of his fellow monastics when he was new to the ashram and new to speaking, gave him advice. One said, take a hot bath, and he said that guy, and one of his fellow monks took a real hot bath, took it too long, and he was so limp when he got up there that he was unable to give an effective talk. And then the other one said what his method was, and I do not recommend this, but he said, when I get up there to talk, I look out and I just see everybody as a cabbage head. In other words, he didn't see them as people. He just saw them as inanimate things. And that way he didn't get personally drawn into his ego. But I thought that was pretty strange. I would say the opposite. You want to look at people and try to connect, not, personally, but you want to make facial recognition, looking at somebody. You never have a conversation with somebody and they never look at you? Well, that's not good. So you look in the audience, you look at different people. But I think if you're pushing out and sharing outwardly with something, you have something to share which you really want to share with people, your focus is going to be on them, answering their questions, what their need is, rather than your need to talk, your need to expound. You're trying to answer the need out there. But it's a long journey sometimes for us to not be self-conscious, to be relaxed. I can't say how long it takes, but it can be years. But I think the best thing is to practice. And this is why they have speaking clubs, they have I don't know in India what these are like. I know in America, people, they have clubs where people get together and every week, somebody's supposed to say 2 minutes extemporaneously on some subject just off the top. That's just good practice, and they have fun, and I think in our own situation, just practicing in small groups of just saying something and not hiding, because which is that was my strategy at first, is just don't call on me. I hide, in whatever way possible, and then I got to the point where when I knew I was going to have to speak, I wanted to be first. One is that I wouldn't have to repeat anybody else, so it's a good strategy that way. But two, I was so nervous, I wanted to get it over with. And three, I just wanted to take the initiative and just push out from there. So whatever you can find, I wish I could say how to get rid of the ego self, but that's the embodiment of the whole spiritual path, is self-forgetfulness, the ego self-forgetfulness. And if anybody has some good ideas, put them on here and we can share them, because Toastmasters Club, I see, yeah, that was one of them. Yeah. Sometimes while talking, my mind will go blank. I literally search for words. Well, yeah, I understand that. And sometimes you just have to back up and just say, what was it I'm saying? Let me say that again. You said, and I can't say it. And then I say, I've run into a roadblock. Let me try again. And you backtrack and start again, because somehow the flow is going and it doesn't go over the next hurdle. But usually it's because you're trying to, I think, for myself, speaking from my experience, if I'm speaking from memory, I got a topic here and I got these 10 points in my mind and I got to remember all 10 points, and I'm speaking because it's a memorized speech of some sort. That's very easy to run into that problem with. You become frozen and your memory goes blank and you just forgot everything. And so you have to, I find it's not a good, if I have to memorize 6 or 8 points, I'll put them on a card, because I can't freeze. Trying to memorize your speech freezes us, because unless you're one of those ones who has a perfect memory and can do that, most of us can't. So I don't recommend that is speaking from memory. You may have certain points. Now, when I learned to, you might say I had a breakthrough in public speaking in my own learning curve, is I used to try to memorize everything. Oh, I got to say that, then I got to say that. And it just was so tension inducing that it didn't work. But then I remembered, okay, I'm going to make 4 points. And then I would think about the points and maybe get a story with that point. And then I'd think of the next point. And I knew once I was in that point, I could speak about all sorts of things on that. The problem and the key to making it a successful talk was to get from point A to point B to point C. It was this point D. It was the transition. How do you get from that to the next topic smoothly? And so I found if you had 3 points to make, I only had to remember 2 things: how to get from A to B and how to get from B to C. And you can, maybe it's a story, maybe it's an example, maybe it's some logical way to go this. Now that brings me to this point. It's like you go into a house and you're walking through this house into various rooms. All you need to know is you don't have to memorize anything in that room, because you know the subject fairly well, assuming. You have to memorize where's the door to get out of this subject into the next one. And I found when I picked up on that idea, things went much easier. Then it flowed. I would explore this room, then I remember the doors over there, then I'd run out of that. I'd forget half the things I was going to say in that room, but then I'd run to the doorway and get into the next room smoothly. And I'd talk about that. And then I'd remember the door to the next one. By that time, I'd remember some of the things in the first room, and then I could integrate them. So you might try that, see if it works. And it worked for me. And then I found that was a little, what would you call it, technique, you might say, that I found helpful. Self-forgetfulness is God remembrance. It helps to give it to Master. And then, yeah, that's what you have to do, is basically, like Swami used to say, he says, I may make a fool of myself, but that's not news. Mentally, I always kind of think I am rather foolish. And so he had accepted the fact that if people, they're just going to discover what he had already discovered a long time ago, and accepted. I thought he said it in a joking voice, but I thought it had a lot of pertinence to it too, to that. And your mind goes back, taps ego self, goes blank. Murali in Ananda, yeah, if you want to listen, good, that's a good point. Go on to the Murali, I don't, his last name skips my mind at the moment. Anyway, he's one of the Ananda Sangha members from Seattle. He's a fantastic storyteller, and he tells all these stories from the class, the epics, the Ramayana, the Mahabharata, all of them. He was born into a family of storytellers, and he picked up the art when he was a child, and he's taken it into his adult life, and he's fantastic. Now, if you do a little research, you can find out where, and if any of you know how to get onto his storytelling pages, go there. They're fascinating. You just sit there and listen for the longest time to some of these storytellers, and you watch or listen to his voice, how he does it. And it's an art, and he does it very well. So I that's a good suggestion, whoever made that. And I think that's it. I think we got them all. Oh, Murali's on YouTube. Yeah, but is just going on YouTube and typing in Murali, is that going to get me to him? I haven't tried. So if anybody could follow up on that and maybe be a little more specific, how to actually get to those stories of his. Okay, Murali Ananda Sangha, try that. Okay. Anyway, thanks all of you for joining this evening.